Thanks very much, Mike Dasa. Very good to be back in Sheffield again. Good to see, old friends and quite a lot of people I haven't met before at the Sangharakshita, so it's very good to see that. So you could call this talk something like Recollecting My Teacher. So Sangharakshita, I'm going to, by and large, refer to him as Bhante throughout this talk. Bhante is an honorific in Buddhist tradition for your teacher. It means rough translation would be Venerable Sir, but it has connotations of real warmth and reverence. So I'm going to mainly refer to Sangharakshita as Bhante. So Sangharakshita, Bhante is my teacher. For me, he's not just the founder of our movement, the Triratna Buddhist community, and the founder of our order, the Triratna Buddhist order. He's my personal teacher. As Mantri Dasa has indicated, I first met him when I was 17 in Brighton. I might say a bit more about my first meeting with him later. And I was ordained by him when I was 19. And I've known him and been in touch with him ever since that time. And I still am in touch with him and go to see him. He is the one single decisive influence on my life. If there is one, it is him. Bhante, Urgyen, Sangharakshita, I'll say something about this word Urgyen a bit later, is, yes, the dominant single influence in my life. And I'm very proud to be his disciple, and I'm proud that he is my teacher. And I have no doubt at all that if I've made any human progress, spiritual progress, it's entirely based on what he's taught me, what he's given me. Whatever understanding I have of the Dharma is based upon what he has taught me. And, I really can't overstate the effect that he's had on me. I know this might sound a bit strange to some people, because it's not something that perhaps people have experience of in the modern world. And, even I think sometimes people can be a little bit suspicious of that kind of relationship. Maybe it's a bit cultish or something like that. But there it is. That's my experience. And I can see why in Buddhist tradition Buddhists have always venerated their teacher. Always venerated their teacher. I think especially of Milarepa, the great Tibetan yogi, hermit. Long after he'd left his teacher, Marapa, who was a very stern teacher, long after Milarepa had attained enlightenment, every single song that Milarepa sang, he was famous for his teaching the Dharma through songs, every single song begins with a praise of his teacher, of Marpa, an expression of his deep gratitude to Marpa, to his teacher, because Marpa had made his enlightenment possible. Well, I feel that way too, not to the same degree, with the same intensity of Milarepa. Milarepa was an enlightened being. But I definitely feel that way about my teacher. I'm actually able to talk to you here in this centre because of Bhante, because of Sangharakshita. We would not have a fantastic centre like this without Sangharakshita. Now, in saying this kind of thing, I'm not making any claims about Sangharakshita, about Bhante. Sometimes people ask me, is he enlightened? Is he a stream entrant? Is he irreversible from enlightenment? Is he a bodhisattva? Well, he's never made any claims, and so neither will I make any claims about him. And sometimes people are a bit puzzled by that, that somehow, if you revere somebody in that way, they must be surely enlightened or have insight, because, presumably, if they do, that means you must be guaranteed that particular ticket, to enlightenment, that one way to enlightenment ticket. But I think that's all rather naive, that way of thinking, and I've grown to see that that's rather crass. Frankly, I'm not interested in speculation about, in a way, anybody's spiritual attainment or lack of it. I find it really boring and arid. Very often people have rather narrow and ill-informed notions of what an enlightened being is, what a highly developed person is, and which are almost laughable. So I can tell you this, I don't really know who Bhante Sangharakshita is. I don't really know where he's at all. He's actually a deeply mysterious man. He's quite strange in some ways. Some of the stories that I might tell later might illustrate that. In some ways, though, he's extraordinarily ordinary. I mean, if I go to see Bhante, there's a sort of level where it's a bit like, in a way, seeing your granddad or something like that, or your dad. He wears the same sort of clothes that my dad used to wear and things like that. And in a way, you have a very ordinary conversation. But that's not the whole story. I remember one order member years and years ago said that he thought that Sangharakshita, that Bhante was a bit like the TARDIS. Doctor Who's. It looks like a police telephone box on the outside, but, very ordinary. Well, those phone boxes were ordinary in their day, I know, but you go into them and you're suddenly into this sort of infinite realm. Well, he is a bit like that, very hard to fathom. What I do know is that meeting him and being associated with him and practicing in his spiritual community has transformed my life. Practicing the Dharma that he has taught me has transformed my life, and it's as simple as that, really. Now, I was asked to give a more personal talk this evening about Sangharakshita, recollections, stories even. That's a good thing to do, to share those more personal things. Many of you here have never met him, so maybe something more personal will be of interest. And that's okay, but just before doing that, just a cautionary word. Sangharakshita Bhante is the teacher, the spiritual friend of many, many people. I'm just one among many hundreds, thousands. And my stories of him are very important to me. It's highly likely that if I told these stories with Bhante present, he wouldn't recall them. I could imagine him saying, did I say that? Did I do that? Probably about just about everything that I mentioned. This is very interesting because although these events are of great significance to me, in all of these stories, Bhante is always just being himself. It's one of the great features of Bhante. He's the person, one of the only people I know who has always been themselves, completely and fully. I'm sure he's never been conscious of doing anything special, of saying anything special, even though it might seem special and extraordinary to those who are on the end of that communication. As far as he is concerned, I'm sure he's just thinking in terms of communicating the Dharma, being authentic, communicating the Dharma, without thinking of being authentic and communicating the Dharma. But because of who he is and because of my feelings for him, these things are of very great significance for me. They have a life-changing significance. It's interestingly enough, over the years, as I've got older and have been around the Sangha for quite a long time now, I've experienced this from my own side. Sometimes people have come up to me or told a story about something I said or did, which sounded really fantastic and had a transforming effect upon them, but I can't remember it. I thought, did I really say that? That's fantastic. Which is very interesting. Sometimes people get a bit disappointed that you can't remember. That's, I think, sometimes disciples, as it were, like to think they're very special and they're getting a special sort of attention, and actually, everybody's just being themselves. So I'm not going to give you a history of my contact with Bhante. Instead, I'm just going to talk about him under different headings. These just occurred to me this afternoon. If I had more time, I'd probably refine the categories. But anyway, this will have to do. So first of all, Bhante as creator of environment. Bit of a mouthful. Secondly, Bhante as translator. Thirdly, Bhante as spiritual friend. Fourthly, Bhante as Vajra guru. And fifthly, Bhante as Urgyen. So first of all, Bhante as creator of environment. So, as I've said, I came along to our Sangha when I was 17. I'd already been interested in Buddhism, particularly through the writings of Lama Govinda, his fantastic books on Tibetan Buddhism, which really emphasised the importance of finding a guru, receiving initiation, meditation instruction. Well, you didn't find those in the Yellow Pages in 1974 in Brighton, I can assure you. And it was a source of great frustration, that I just couldn't find a teacher. I was still living with my family and so on. But walking one day into the local freak shop, hippie shop in Brighton, there was a little note that said that the Friends of the Western Buddhist Order, which I thought was an incredibly boring name. It can't be the real thing because they're just friends of. The Friends of the that was the old name, by the way, of our movement. The Friends of the Western Buddhist Order are thinking of starting a centre in Brighton, and it gave a contact address. So immediately I went with a friend of mine to this place to find out what was going on. And very nice people there. It was their house, and they said, well, there's an order member named Buddhadasa staying here. If you come back next week, you can come to the class that he takes. So my first class was a full-length Padmavajra, 50 minutes. There was some instruction beforehand, and then the sevenfold puja immediately afterwards, without being explained what this devotional ceremony was. Fantastic, brilliant. By the end of the puja, don't ask me why or how, I knew that I was going to devote my life to Buddhism. I knew as distinctly and as clearly as, I knew anything. I knew that I didn't become an order member. I'd only met one half an hour, an hour before all that. Very strange, but I knew. And, I plunged into the activities there, and eventually left home, left my job, left home, just plunged in. I just wanted this fantastic adventure called the Dharma, called Buddhism. And we started a centre, or Buddhist started a centre in Brighton itself, so I moved into the community to just, go into the beyond. That's what I wanted. I didn't want a conventional life in any way. I knew I didn't want that life anyway. Early on, it was, before I'd even met Sangharakshita, I was in a way, a world that he had initiated, that he'd sort of started to create, before even meeting him. So this is all some months before any personal meeting. But yes, so I was in this world in a way that he'd initiated, the environment, if you like, that he was creating, particularly through meeting the order members who were involved in that centre, particularly Buddhadasa and Visantra. And over the years, of course, I just went deeper and deeper into that environment. Even, actually, I discovered that I was involved in helping to create that environment, to make that environment even richer. And that goes on, that continues. And I think this is extremely important. It's a very, very big part of having Sangharakshita as my teacher. I think Sangharakshita is a really great teacher because he's encouraged us right from the start not simply to be in relationship to him and to learn from him. He's encouraged us to create environments in which the Dharma can flourish and grow between us and for the benefit of the wider world. And central to all this, of course, is spiritual friendship and spiritual community. One of the great gifts I feel I've received from Sangharakshita is the importance of becoming a good friend to other people and receiving friendships with others and to experience spiritual community. It's one of our central and essential spiritual practices. It's important as meditation, important as study, important as anything else that we do. The actual, communication within the spiritual community, within spiritual friendship. This is a very rare emphasis, actually, in Buddhist tradition. Sangharakshita's insight into the importance of this. We completely take it for granted, but I can assure you, it's not actually that dominant in contemporary Buddhist tradition. It's around, but with nothing like the emphasis that Sangharakshita places on it as something transformative. He's encouraged us to come together as much as we possibly can, and not just to enjoy one another's support as spiritual friends, but to create centres, Buddhist centres like this one, to go on retreat together, even to live together and work together in the context of the Dharma. And I've learned, and I continue to learn so much through, that interaction, that environment. And of course, this is traditionally what a teacher does. If you look at the Buddhist tradition, if you, all of those teachers that you heard about on the refuge tree, if you went to one of those great teachers, if you were serious, you would have to enter their world. You would have to enter their environment, the environment that they create. When Milarepa, the great yogi Milarepa, when he went to Marpa, it wasn't simply, he didn't just get meditation technique instruction. He had to enter Marpa's world, Marpa's community, his extended family and his community of his disciples. And he didn't just learn through studying, through hearing talks. He learned through a life lived in his teacher's world, with all the challenges that teacher threw up, and Marpa really threw up some challenges. In other words, the teacher creates a world of the Dharma, a world of the Dharma, an environment. And I feel that Sangharakshita has done that for me, for all of us. He's that he initiated the creation of a Dharma environment, a spiritual community in which you learn and you change. Apart from anything else, leaving aside, that point, I'm also blessed with many strong, loving friendships with many people because of Sangharakshita's teaching on friendship. There's a lot more I could say about this business of environment and the creation of environments. It's an extraordinarily important point, I think, about how you learn to live a Buddhist life. It isn't just about working on your mind. You have to learn in an environment through being. Big point. But anyway, moving on. The second point is Bhante as translator. I'm not talking here about translation in the literal sense, from translating text from Pali into English, for example, although Bhante has done translation like that. He's done a very good translation of the Dhammapada. I mean translating the Dharma into a form that I've been able to use, that I can actually apply. As you probably know from any reading that you've done, the Buddhist tradition is vast and complex. It's even bewildering, even it seems contradictory. And one of the things that Bhante's done, he's gone into it all very, very deeply indeed, very deeply. He's gone into the depth of the Dharma, the principles of the Dharma. He's gone down into the ocean of the Dharma, and he's returned and taught it in a form that I can actually use and apply here and now. Well, there's so much to say here, so much. What to say? Just about the teachings that he's taught. The first teachings of the Dharma that I heard was listening to, wait for it, lectures of Sangharakshita on reel-to-reel tape. really lo-fi we're talking about. Later, then there were cassette tapes and things like that. So this is long before internet days and all that. But amazing, listening to this great big reel-to-reel tape recorder, listening to Sangharakshita. The experience of first hearing these lectures was thrilling, electrifying. Hearing these talks, bringing the Dharma alive. There wasn't just this incredible clarity, but stories, images, myths, and the teaching just laid out in just an incredibly clear but very, very practical fashion. And this is coming through a reel-to-reel tape recorder. There was a combination of clarity, practicality, and energy, urgency, vitality. And it was obvious, looking back, listening to those tapes, he was completely tuned into his audience. A lot of the tapes we were listening to were given in the late 60s. And it was obvious, you could almost feel the audience he was talking to at that time. And eventually, I actually heard him give a live lecture. This was 74, 75, giving a lecture at a big hall in London called Enlightenment as Experience and as Non-Experience. And what was staggering was the range, the incredible range of the lecture. Metaphysics, incredible insight, sort of psycho-spiritual insight into our condition, insight into our sort of existential situation, even a sort of, a sweep of history, how we were products of a particular historical situation, and then intensely practical points about how to practice now. Amazing, really. And later on, I saw this same ability to translate the Dharma in India. As Maitridasa said, I first went to India, this must have been about 1978, when Lokamitra started our activities in India with the ex-untouchable Dalit Buddhists, followers of Dr. Ambedkar. And I was there when Sangharakshita made his return visit. He'd left India in 64. And in 79, because we were starting things out there, he came out to give some lectures, do some ordinations. So it was quite a thing, Sangharakshita coming out. And I thought, well, I wonder how he's going to be. I'd seen him operating in England. How's he going to be in India? I sort of, I don't know why, I obviously didn't know. I thought he might go, wow, I'm back. What was very interesting was how ordinary he was. As if he just walked down the road, from, his cottage in Norfolk. There he was, back in India, mindful, aware, playful, giving lectures now to 2,000, 3,000 people. That's quite a small audience in India. But I'd never seen anything like it. Sitting there, watching Sangharakshita give a Dharma lecture to 2,000-3,000 people. And what was so extraordinary to me was how tuned in he was. He was speaking, of course, through an interpreter, but he was completely attuned to the people and their aspirations, as well as being completely in touch with the depth and range of the Dharma. I remember one lecture he gave in India. He started with an exposition of the Yogacara system of consciousness. I don't know if any of you are familiar with this, but according to the Yogacara school, we have 8 consciousnesses. Check it, So your usual 5 sense consciousness, the mind, which is regarded as a sort of 6th sense, a 6th consciousness. And then what's known as the Klishto Mano Vijnana, the defiled mind consciousness. It's defiled because it divides everything up into subject, object, self and other, and from that, out of that basic delusion comes greed and hatred and all the rest of it. And then there's a deep consciousness called the Alaya Vijnana, the storehouse consciousness. So he's running through this and I'm thinking, where's he going? Where's he going with this? This is an audience of people who, they're Dalits, they're the most downtrodden of Indian society. Where's he going with this? How can this relate? And then, when he got to the Krishna-mano Vijnana, the defiled mind consciousness that splits up everything into self and other, he just said, and this is where caste comes from. This is where the view that somebody is outcast comes from. It comes from the mind. It comes from the dualistic mind. It was amazing to see him relating basic ignorance to social division and conflict, to social inequality. It was really extraordinary to witness that. The Dharma has to connect with our actual situation, not in a superficial, facile way, not a sort of dumbing down. The Dharma in its profundity needs to connect with what we need. There's a saying of the great Indian teacher Atisha, the precept of the teacher is more important than all of the sutras and their commentaries. The precept of the teacher meaning the particular teaching the teacher gives to you, which shows you how to apply the Dharma to your circumstances now. And over the years, Sangharakshita Bhante has given many precepts. And in this sense, he still gives them. Some of them are very personal. When I went to see him recently, I asked him for a precept. I asked him to give me a particular kind of maxim, a particular approach to things that he thought I might need to practice now. I'm not going to tell you what it is. Not at the moment. Not yet, anyway. But what I will tell you is that a couple of years after I was ordained, I attended my first order convention, and this was a big gathering of the order in a school in Sussex. And Bhante Sangharakshita led all the meditations, all the pujas, gave 3 important talks. Just to say what he looked like in those days, he looked pretty much like that. So robes, long hair, and it was fantastic meditating with him. Incredibly still. As soon as he sat down, he just didn't move for the entire meditation. And he guided us through some meditations with very simple instruction. Very, very... I was sitting quite near him because I thought I'd get the vibes. I'd get more of the vibes than other people. It's the way I thought in those days. But, I just didn't move, because even though I really wanted to, because it was like sitting next to a mountain. And he gave 3 very important talks and also encouraged us to, I've got others of us, younger order members, to give talks. And it was very interesting giving a talk with Sangharakshita present. I've done that a few times. And sometimes people say, God, didn't you feel nervous? And, because you're with somebody with an extraordinarily critical mind. But I felt nothing but support and encouragement from him. Anyway, one of these talks was called A System of Meditation, where Sangharakshita laid out our system of practice, how the mindfulness of breathing, the Padmavajra, insight meditation, and visualization meditation, and just sitting meditation fitted together in a general scheme. And actually what he was giving us was a precept. Of all the different instructions of meditation, he was saying, look, here's a path of practice to use. And since then I've done my best to apply that particular teaching. And it's very interesting. Earlier this year I was more ill than I've ever been. I've never been so ill, and I had to go to hospital and so on to have my appendix out and all that sort of thing. And it was a big deal for me, I'd never been so poorly. But what I referred to throughout that period was this system of meditation. It's like being given all these tools that I could apply to my circumstances. First of all, awareness, generated through mindfulness. Okay, this is happening. All this stuff is going on. So don't shy away from it. Just really notice it, really be fully aware of it. Metta, positive emotion. Look, you're not the only person who's ill, and actually, compared with a lot of people, you're not that badly off. As well as experiencing a lot of metta from friends, a lot of love from them. And then reflecting, and this relates to the insight aspect of our system of practice, actually, you're not in control. You don't want this to be happening, but your body has got other ideas. And actually, most of the time, you're not in control. You know, that's all a little bit tenuous. There isn't really a self to be in control of all this. So relax and, you know, open up to what's going on. And then, especially important to me was constantly bringing to mind the Buddha or the Bodhisattva that Sangharakshita had given me at ordination, my visualization meditation. That really inspired me to, you know, look into what was happening. And then, you know, sometimes just giving up, just letting go in relation to everything that was happening. I could bring all these things, this incredible sort of clarity and richness, you know, to this difficult experience. So, you know, it's I'm so grateful to Sangharakshita for, you know, giving us this very, very simple but very rich set of practices to apply to quite an extreme situation. Thirdly, there's Bhante as a spiritual friend. So over the years I've experienced Bhante as a really very kind and encouraging spiritual friend. After I first met him, I got into correspondence with him, and I just received enormous encouragement and kindness. I went to see him when he was living at that time in a small house in North Norfolk. I was 17, 18, I was really interested and completely crazed about Tibetan Buddhism. And, you know, his study was full of tankas and rupas and, you know, and I'd ask him about his Tibetan teachers and, you know, and I'd ask him about these tankas. He said, oh, that one was given to me by the Dalai Lama and, you know, all this sort of thing. I was going, wow, God. And of which he looked very amused. And any kind of initiatives that I took at that time, he really picked them up. When he came to our centre in Brighton, I was the shrine keeper. And I talked to him about that, and we were given some really lovely puja bowls, you know, the 7 bowls that you sometimes see in the shrine. And I was talking to him about that, and he explained to me, he said, oh, right, but when you fill them, you have to go through this particular ritual. He taught me this simple ritual, explained it to me, and the reflections that one should have as you made these offerings. And I was so taken with that. I wrote a manual for shrine keeping, which I sent to him, and he was so taken with it. He said he thought it ought to be published, it ought to be brought out. And it actually was, but only a few years ago, by Vajra. When I started to get to know Vajra and the centre here, she was, you know, we were talking about keeping shrines, and I was able to remember everything I'd written in that manual, and I sent it off to her, and well, it became a little booklet. I don't know if it's still here. So all those years, you know, that bore fruit all those years ago, but it does come from Sangharakshita. And then there's the time he told me he would ordain me. So it's a bit of a strange story the way although I started in Brighton, I moved to London, to our then North London centre in Archway, in North London, but I used to go down to Brighton for visits and so on. And Sangharakshita was going to Brighton to launch the first volume of his memoirs, The Thousand Petal Lotus, that later became The Rainbow Road. So I went down with him to Brighton. Just a little sartorial point about Sangharakshita in those days. I can't remember what I wore, it must have looked ridiculous. But anyway, this was the era when Sangharakshita wore a plum-coloured suit, long sort of, you know, fairly lank hair, and sort of cherry red DMs, shoes, not boots. That's what he looked like then. So a bit strange. But anyway, it didn't seem strange in those days. Anyway, so we went down to Brighton. And it was a very interesting experience, actually. He launched his book at this friend's meeting house. And at the end of the talk, Sangharakshita had his back to the door, and it was as if he was aware of somebody behind him coming through the door, and he turned round, and this very old friend of his came through the door, and they had this, very warm embrace, and it was as if he was aware of this guy before he even came into the room. It was very interesting. Anyway, the next day I was having breakfast with him in the place we were staying, and I'd asked for ordination and all that sort of thing, and hadn't thought any more about it. I was making him a cup of tea and some toast and all the rest of it. You have to understand, I was 19, very young, very enthusiastic, probably quite innocent, maybe, certainly naive. And Sangharakshita said, "Oh, by the way, I've decided to ordain you." I said, right, thanks. I don't know what to say. And he said, "You don't have to say anything." Meanwhile, I think the toast was burning, and I was sort of spilling the tea and all the rest of it. And then he went into this whole thing. This would be interesting for any of you involved in the young people's Sangha. He said, young people have a lot to offer the movement. In those days, mid-20s was old in the movement. Late 20s was old. They were the older ones in those days. And early 30s, well, I mean, you sort of past it really. That was young people in those days. So I was a real young person. So, yeah, he said, young people have a lot to offer the movement. And he said, you don't have to go through things in order to practice the Dharma. And that was a very interesting thing he said, because there were some people who, in a way, didn't take me that seriously, because I was so young and hadn't sort of been through a lot of disillusionment with life and all the rest of it. And, I think Sangharakshita is pretty canny. He probably knew that I would go through things. But he was just so encouraging about my youthful enthusiasm and my love of the Dharma. He took that completely seriously. When we went back to London, I think it was more or less the last train back to London from Brighton, and we were sitting opposite each other, and I dozed off. I just kept falling asleep. And as we were going through the night back to London, I kept kind of waking up, and Sangharakshita was just sitting, looking at me, with this incredible smile on his face of delight, encouragement. It's a very peculiar experience to kind of doze off and then wake up and have this very, very benign presence looking right into me. I almost felt as my soul was being looked into. A very tender, loving experience, actually. Another vivid experience of this more tender side of Sangharakshita was again in India in 79, so some years later, so long after, sometime after I'd been ordained. And when we were in India at that time, when he came back on his first visit, I was his sort of attendant. So I washed his robes, I typed his letters, I made him tea, put up his mosquito net, and also the really lovely thing to do after one of these big lectures he gave, because in India, before a lecture, you get given loads of garlands, and because of Sangharakshita being regarded as a great spiritual teacher, there were piles and piles of garlands. So I used to gather up the garlands, get his sandals on his feet, take him through the crowds to his car, not his car, it was a car that somebody was lending to take him back to where we were staying. And as we walked through the crowd, people, of course, were pressing in. And people are very devotional in India, especially older people, older men and women. They really wanted to venerate him. Through putting their hands on his feet and so on. Any kind of contact is just regarded as so important, so significant. And I thought, well, Sangharakshita's tired, he's just given a lecture. I was trying to sort of push people out of the way, and Sangharakshita just put his hand on my shoulder and very clearly, firmly and very kindly said, just don't do that. This is very important for people. It's very important for them to have that contact. And it was a very, very touching moment actually, because he was kind in relation to my ignorance of the situation. You know, he didn't tell me off. But there was also this real tenderness and feeling for that community. You know, because you have to appreciate that the Buddhist community come from, you know, the untouchable, you know, what they regard as untouchables by caste Hindus, and they would never be allowed to get near to a spiritual teacher in the old days. So to have that kind of connection is just so important, and I really felt his feeling for that community, for those people. And on that same visit, I experienced Bhante's gentle and playful teasing. That kind of made me more aware of things in myself. I was sitting one day and Bhante was talking with Lokamitra, who was really the main person who's started things in India, our Sangha in India. He's done extraordinary work. And they were talking, and I was just sitting listening, and Bhante was talking about what good speakers there were emerging in our order. And he said, Subhuti is very good, and Nagabodhi is very good, and Padmavajra is very good, and you're very good, Lokamitra. And I was sitting there thinking, yeah? What about me? I'm pretty good. I was thinking this, you know, trying to look cool. I know I'm a good speaker. You know. And then there was this pause in the conversation. And Bhante looked right at me. He turned and looked at me. And there was this lovely big smile. And it was a smile that seemed to say, I'm going to give you what you want. And he said, of course, of the younger order members, Padmavajra is pretty good. And I thought, yeah. And then I thought, oh, crikey, he's read my mind. You know? And then I thought, a bit later, I thought, actually, my thoughts were so loud at that moment, probably anybody could have heard it. But it was a really lovely moment, because he did mean it, but at the same time there was this teasing of my egotism, my conceit, my wanting attention. And at other times, when I've been in difficulties, have been moments of real crisis in my spiritual life, in my Dharma life. Whenever I've gone to him and talked about that in a clear and open way, he's just been fully present and given me really good advice. It was very interesting a few years ago, and by that, Sangharakshita these days is effectively blind. He has this macular degeneration. And some years ago I was in crisis and I went to see him, and it was really curious because I really felt he was looking right at me and right into me. And he just gave me some very helpful advice and encouragement, which goes on. I saw him a few weeks ago actually, and again there was this sense of encouragement and even a kind of blessing, if you like, not in a formal sense, but of just this strong encouragement and giving of confidence. But there have been other experiences which go under the heading of Bhante the Vajra Guru. So I'll need a sip. Probably a brandy. It's not, it's water. So Bhante the Vajra Guru, in his lecture on the symbolism of the Vajra, the adamantine thunderbolt scepter of the Lamas, which is a sort of symbol of reality in Tantric Buddhism, in that lecture, Bhante talks about the Vajra Guru. And he says the Vajra Guru is the no-nonsense Guru, or if you like, the Guru who means business. He's the Guru who doesn't care what he does to bring the disciple to reality. Doesn't care at all. To cut through the games, the trips, the ideas that get in the way of the disciple experiencing reality as it is. Well, I have to say there have been times when I've experienced Bhante like this. He, of course, is just being himself. He's not pretending to be a Vajra guru. He's not suddenly going into Vajra guru mode. He's not playing a role. He's just being real. And I got an intimation of that very early on. So I remember when Sangharakshita first came to Brighton, so I thought, he's coming, my guru is coming. I'd read The Survey of Buddhism, and there weren't many books of his in those days around. I'd listened to all the lectures I could listen to. I knew he was my teacher. My guru is coming. I know it sounds ridiculous, but that was what I was thinking. And Sangharakshita came in. First of all, he was shorter than I thought he would. Listening to the lectures, this kind of strong voice, you think that he's going to be... But he was quite short, and he was wearing a sort of rather shabby raincoat. And, I went over to say hello, and he said, "Hello." Oh, right. And it was all incredibly low-key. It was such an incredible sort of deflating moment, which actually I think was a very good thing in many ways. It just played it all. Anyway, the next day, where we were living in the community then, we had a very, very tiny living room next to a very tiny kitchen. Our place was just a terraced house in Brighton. And there was me and Bunty sitting in this room. And in those days, again, I'll just describe what he was wearing, what he looked like. So, sort of longish, rather greasy black hair. He had these amazing glasses, which seemed as though they'd been sort of stuck together, broken, stuck together. Probably unshaven, a few days' growth. Wearing a sort of kind of check tweedy jacket and a, slightly sort of out of shape jumper and sort of nondescript trousers. And in those days he wore these great big sort of boots, like kind of boots a builder would wear or something like that. And, there was something quite weird and strange about him. Even sort of dangerous in those days. These days Bunty isn't sort of like that, but in those days, when you were around him, you kind of thought anything could happen. Anything might happen, anything could happen. And the thing was, this thing about him being himself, he didn't initiate any conversation. So I'm sitting there, and he's not sort of saying, how are you? What are you doing? And I was saying, like a cup of tea? That would be nice. Make a cup of tea. So we're sitting there, he's sort of just staring into space, and I'm sitting there, feeling rather awkward. And at a certain point, he leaned over to this jam jar, which had incense sticks in it, took an incense stick out of it, and with one end started to clean his ears. To which my thought was, you can't do that. What would my mother say? Very interesting. What would my mother say? What the teaching was there, I don't know, but it was a very weird experience. Then there was, it's the sort of thing that throws you back on yourself, you know what I mean, when that kind of thing happens. After I was ordained, I went through a very tricky period. As I said, before I came across our Sangha, I read the works of Lama Govinda, emphasising meeting a guru, a teacher, you get initiation, you have meditation instruction, and, what he describes is a kind of transmission. And, I have to admit that the whole idea that you could go to somebody, they do something, and you get it, and then off you go to enlightenment was very attractive because, you don't have to do much, do you? You don't have to work, you don't have to take responsibility, you just sail along. And I think I definitely did that with Sangharakshita. And after I was ordained, I went on a seminar with him at Padmavajra. We just got Padmavajra. And it was on mind in Buddhist psychology, which got turned into that book, Know Your Mind. Now that was one beast of a seminar. incredible sort of definition of mental states, positive mental states, negative mental states, neutral mental states, really difficult stuff. And it was like going 15 rounds with a really, top boxer, and not only that, I was in this state of really wanting attention from Sangharakshita, of sort of hanging around him and trying to be the special disciple. And over the course of the seminar, I experienced, and this also lasted after the seminar, I experienced what I can only describe as Sangharakshita in Teflon mode. Basically, when I was in that mood of wanting attention, wanting to be the special one, he just ignored me. He just ignored me. He was just not interested, bored. He'd kind of look away and go and say something to him. He'd just look away. It was really quite something. There was like this, almost like this sort of, don't take this in the wrong way. Chogyam Trungpa talks somewhere about the teacher putting out a kind of black energy. It's not negative, nasty energy, but it's just this sort of sense of you being thrown back on yourself. Because, basically I was in a mood where he couldn't give me anything. Very, very strong. Or we'd have these very strange communications. He did this fantastic review in the old FWBO newsletter on this old traditional Chan Zen text called the Blue Cliff Record. And he was obviously incredibly inspired by these Chinese Chan Zen adepts, referring to the nun, iron grindstone Yu, whose active edge was sharp and dangerous. Wow. I was so taken with this. I said, Bhante, why don't you do a seminar on the Blue Cliff Record? And he looked at me with this really weird expression. He said, you'd have to be ready for anything. Oh, right, okay. Very, very strange. Or, more down to earth perhaps, again, during that visit in India after one of these incredible lectures, coming back with all the garlands and so on, I said to Sangharakshita, Bhante, I wanted to say something. I wanted to express to him how amazing this was to be in this whole world that was sort of, that he'd created. I said, Bhante, I don't know what I will do when you die. And he just shot back, well, that's assuming I'll die first. Yeah. And looking back, the message has always been, actually, take responsibility for yourself in one way or another. That's been the abiding message. Actually don't look to me. Take responsibility for yourself. There was, sometime in the 80s, so I was probably in my late 20s then, I had probably what is the clearest and most devastating communication I've ever had with anybody. So there's a background to this. Between 80 and 86, I was living in the Croydon Buddhist Centre, the community at Aryatara, and working in the Croydon Buddhist Centre, in a very, very dynamic, strong community, which had its problems, had a quite charismatic leader in that community, and I was sort of one of his followers. And Sangharakshita in 84 said, I want you to go back to India, I want you to start working in India again in a couple of years. So I started to go back to India, but there came a point where there was a choice. Either I was going to be in India for longer periods, or I was going to do something else. And Sangharakshita was visiting the Croydon Centre, and the two of us were, so it was just the two of us having a chat, and I said, look, Bhante, I'm not sure about what to do. India's opening up. What should I do? And he said, well, what do you want to do? And I said, well, I thought maybe I should stay in Croydon, actually. He said, I don't think that's a good idea. Oh. And then he went into this thing. He said, young, single men need to make sure that they grow up, that they mature. And there is this emotional immaturity that has been noticed. He meant my emotional immaturity. He said, you could do anything. You could start a centre, you could write a book, you could become a hermit, but you need to do it from yourself. You need to take responsibility. If you had a family, you'd have to take responsibility, but you don't need to do that. You need to take responsibility. He said it so clearly and simply, and without any aversion or anything like that. It was devastating, but liberating. It was like a clear mirror being held up to me. And it took a while to put it into practice, but I'm very, very grateful for that very, very clear feedback, for that Vajra Guru moment. And a few years later, in a letter to me about another dilemma that I had, he said, whatever you decide, I have complete confidence in whatever decision you make. I'm confident that you'll act in the best possible interests, not just for yourself, but for everybody. In fact, I'm confident in any decision you make about anything. Which was quite a strong message, but it's been the message over the years. In fact, it goes right back to early experiences. Some of you here are mitras, some of you here perhaps have been to mitra ceremonies. Well, I'll tell you about my mitra ceremony with Sangharakshita. In those days, when you became a mitra, you had 2 order members who were your Kalyana mitras. So we went away, the Brighton Sangha, to this farm house in Thetford Forest, and all of the Brighton Sangha, that were serious, were becoming mitras, and they all had their different order members. And you went in alone. It wasn't in front of everybody. It was Sangharakshita with you and these 2 order members, and you go through a little ceremony. And I was the last, because I was by far the youngest. And I don't know, maybe he was tired or something, I don't know. But I went in and he said, and again, he looked like that. And he didn't smile the whole time. He said, becoming a mitra is like joining a dance. It's like joining a dance. He said, you have been in the wings. You've tried out a few steps, but this is you joining the dance. Maybe one day you'll get to the centre of the dance, but you've got to join the dance. He said, everything's been thought, everything has been felt, everything has been said. Now's the time for action. Now's the time for commitment. And as I say, he wasn't smiling. I mean, it's a fantastic image of joining a dance and all the rest of it. But I remember afterwards, one of the order members, Visantra, one of my Kalyana Mitras, said to me, he didn't speak like that to anybody else. I thought, oh, God. But actually, I haven't forgot that, that he was really emphasising the importance of action, of commitment, of not faffing about in the spiritual life. I could reel off the Dharma like that. I've got a very good memory for the Dharma. In those days, I was so irritating to people. I could quote the Bodhicharyavatara at people. But he was saying, that's not enough. That's not enough. Okay, so finally, Bhante as Urgyen. So Urgyen is the Tibetan way of saying Uddiyana. Uddiyana is an area of northwest. It's probably a region of Pakistan now, but Uddiyana Urgyen is where Padmasambhava comes from. We're celebrating Padmasambhava Day on Sunday. Is it Sunday? Yes. And Padmasambhava is the archetypal guru. So Sangharakshita was given the name Urgyen by one of his Tibetan teachers, who initiated him into the meditation on Padmasambhava. So he said, now you are Urgyen Sangharakshita. You've got that special connection with Padmasambhava. So I'm going to tell you about my ordination retreat, because I think I got a little glimpse there of Sangharakshita as Urgyen Sangharakshita. So it was on a weekend retreat, and the first thing that happened was that Bhante appeared in very unusual dress. He had his robes, but underneath his robes he was wearing this really beautiful sort of orange gold brocade Tibetan shirt, very high collar, embossed with dragons. He had a special rosary, and no order members had seen him dressed like this before. And somebody commented, "Oh, Bhante, your dressed up. And he looked at me and he said, well, as he's into things Tibetan, I thought I ought to dress up. Very playful. And on that weekend, he didn't just ordain myself and Ratnaguna. He led a seminar on a Milarepa text called The Shepherd's Search for Mind. And the first half of The Shepherd's Search for Mind, Milarepa is talking to a married couple who want to adopt Milarepa. They like him so much, and he tells them in no uncertain terms why he doesn't want to be adopted and why he doesn't want them to find him a wife and all that sort of thing. But the second half of, and they're very pleased, the married couple, by what he has to say. The second half of this song, of this teaching, is about a young shepherd who comes across Milarepa, and they immediately get into this conversation about the nature of awareness, the nature of mind, especially, if you like, the nature of the enlightened mind, that in some mysterious way we all have a connection with. And Bhante was really inspired by this, by Milarepa's songs about the nature of the mind and what he was teaching this young, inspired shepherd. So Bhante started himself, just naturally, pointing to the nature of mind in its fullness, the luminous, empty, blissful mind. And it was as if that was being evoked there and then in the seminar, something very mysterious and elusive and yet liberating to hear. And then there was my ordination itself. It's curious that something that happened when I was 19 is actually the defining moment in my life and the centre of my life, because I think the way I experienced ordination was, actually looking back, a sort of interface between, if you like, time, ordinariness, and something eternal, inconceivable even. There's the sheer fact of having the person who I revere more than anybody actually witnessing my spiritual aspiration, taking me completely seriously. That's an extraordinarily powerful thing to receive. Taking me more seriously than I took myself, as if he was saying, look, this is not a game that you're involved with. This is the real thing, and you can do it. You can actually follow the path to enlightenment. You can do that. That is incredible. That is a real initiation, to have that. But also being introduced to my bodhisattva, that's Padmavajra, and being given my real name, Padmavajra, which is, Bhante said, one of Padmasambhava's names. And my experience of ordination was, in my case, everybody experienced it differently, but it was one of tremendous energy. I felt as though I'd been put in contact with a sort of lightning bolt of energy, which was actually overpowering in many ways, in a way quite frightening. But that energy goes on, it continues. It's never sort of dimmed in my life. I might have there been times where I've, not honoured it, if you like, but that energy goes on, that, as it were, spiritual energy. And I feel through my meeting with Sangharakshita that something direct has happened. He has shown me something. I haven't always realised that, but something direct has been shown to me. Mysterious, unfathomable, as if he really did open up a world to me, which I continue to explore and which continues to open up and unfold. And the only way that could end is if I don't cooperate with that process. And then after I was ordained, came another precept. I was so inspired by the seminar that we did with him, I said that I volunteered to transcribe the seminar. And in those days, Sangharakshita Bhante was very, very strict about how things were transcribed. You had to do them verbatim. So every comma, every pause, you put pause. Laughter, you put laughter in brackets. Every and you get it all down. He didn't want anything missed. So he sent me this card reminding me of how to transcribe this material, as well as saying, what a perfect weekend we've just had. But the postcard was really interesting. It was a postcard of a reproduction of a painting by René Magritte, the surrealist, Belgian surrealist painter, and it was of a lovely blue sky with 3 apples floating in this blue sky. A golden apple, a blue apple, and a red apple floating in space. And I looked at it, and I turned it over, and the name of the painting, Magritte's painting, was First Love. Now, gold, blue and red are the colours of the 3 jewels, the Buddha, Dharma and Sangha. And I really got the message as if he's saying, the 3 jewels, the Buddha, Dharma and Sangha, these are your first love. These are your first love now and forever. There you go.